3, 2.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for logging into our seminar. Can someone just go in the chat and see that they can hear and see us? Just so I know that this worked properly. Oh no, there's no feedback. Are you trying to look at the chat? Is at the bottom of your screen, or it should be on the right. So if anybody could just give me a comment saying that they can hear us, that would be great. Yes, okay, awesome. Thank you, Catherine. And Jessica. Yeah, so thank you for coming to the ArcticNet Student Association's webinar series. It's a post-grad career pathway series that we're launching so that grad students can get an idea of what it's like after graduation. And we have a talk every 2 or 3 weeks, so just keep an eye on our social media to keep up to date on which talks are coming up. And a little bit about this platform. At the bottom, we have a space for people to ask questions. So during the presentation, feel free to ask questions throughout. And if you're comfortable, we can invite you on screen to ask your question. If you don't want to go on screen, that's totally fine too. This will be about no more than an hour presentation. And if you have any questions, again, just go into the bottom, ask a question. And without further ado, I'll introduce our speaker, our second speaker, Dr. Tristan Pearce, who is with the Canada Research Chair in Cumulative Impacts of Environmental Change and Associate Professor in the Department of Global and International Studies at the University of Northern British Columbia. And his research focused on the cumulative impacts of environmental change, in particular, the vulnerability and adaptation of communities and socio-ecological systems to climate change. He is currently working on these issues in partnership with communities in the Canadian Arctic, Pacific Islands regions, and in BC. In particular, he has long-term research relationships with Inuit communities in the Canadian Arctic that span over 16 years. And Tristan takes a grassroots ethnographic approach to research, which emphasizes the importance of studying firsthand what people do and say in particular contexts. So I'm going to just minimize my screen and give the screen over to Tristan.
Thank you, Inu. It's a pleasure to be here. So first, thank you so much, Inu, for the kind invitation. I appreciate the 19, I see a little 19, so I'm assuming there's a few people out there. I appreciate you tuning in. I appreciate that everyone's probably totally exhausted with online. So I look forward to this time that we have together as an opportunity to have a dialogue. I don't see it as me giving necessarily a presentation, but rather being here present, sharing a little bit about my journey with my journey through grad school, my journey working in the Arctic, and inviting questions. I really like these opportunities, and as Inu and I have discussed, to share those things that we don't get to hear when we read papers or books. It's those insights into someone's journey that can sometimes kind of connect the puzzle, where they were, where they're at now, and perhaps where they're going. So as Inu said, I'm really pleased to actually have recently returned home to Canada and to the University of Northern British Columbia, which is located in Prince George, BC. And it's exciting because previous to that, I was actually spent the last 8 years at the University of the Sunshine Coast in Australia. So it's been a journey to get here. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. But before I want to get too far, I want to just take a moment to reflect a little bit on ArcticNet. Of course, the ArcticNet Student Association, which is presenting the webinar today, and just give a little bit of context to my role in that organization and how I got here. And to do that, I'm going to try to share my screen. And Inu and I have just been discussing that sharing screens sometimes works. If it does, wonderful. So I'm going to try, but if it doesn't, that is also okay. So here we go. I'm attempting to share a screen. And I'll try one more time. And I see that we're having trouble sharing screens. Awesome. Totally okay. We're going to move forward with it, and we'll see if that share screen function operates as we move forward. So I really want to begin with, actually, is ArcticNet is an organization that has really been instrumental in my career in Arctic research. It is the organization where I started with my master's. It's the organization that I was mentored through all the way to today, where I'm now an investigator on a few ArcticNet projects. So looking at ArcticNet organization, I think we all have to just take note right now that one of our great leaders, Dr. Louis Fortier, passed away this week. And I know that some of you might have known Louis, others might have heard his name, but I think it's really important to take stock that it was individuals like Dr. Fortier and Dr. Martin Fortier and others who were really the impetus to creating a network for Arctic research. They were the inspiration. They were the titans that said we need to come together. We need to look at these big issues in the Arctic collaboratively. We need to look at them interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary. We need to do this in a way that puts the immediacy on the importance of addressing the rapid change that we're experiencing in the Arctic. And Dr. Fortier is just someone who, if you're part of ArcticNet now, or you were, you will know was really that life, that spirit to the organization, and he's going to be very dearly missed. So on that note, while we're thinking of Dr. Louis Fortier, I want to continue with that conversation about ArcticNet and the role that it played in my career. And I want to go back to kind of the beginning. And I've got my beautiful slides, which if we get to them, we'll get to them. But if not, I'll try to be animated and describe them. When I started my grad school, I started in 2004 at the University of Guelph. So when I came to the University of Guelph, and this is relevant to those of you that either have just started grad school or maybe have the idea of going to grad school, I finished my degree at the University of Northern British Columbia because I grew up in Prince George. Passionate about the environment, passionate about northern environments, passionate about addressing global environmental issues like climate change. When I applied to the University of Guelph, I was not a straight A student. I would say that I was a passionate student, a passionate A- student. And as we know, when we go into grad school, it's competitive. And while I thought I had all that it took to pursue this, that wasn't always the case when you come into the competitiveness with other students. So when I moved from Prince George to the University of Guelph, it was a huge transition for me. I had never been further east than Alberta. I was not a global traveler at that time, so my perspective was fairly limited. When I arrived at Guelph, I realized that there's this cohort of people who are incredibly intelligent, incredibly driven, incredibly experienced. And I was extremely fortunate that my supervisor, which I would consider as a real seminal mentor in my career, Dr. Barry Smith, took a chance on me. And when I say took a chance, is that Dr. Smith, while not an Arctic specialist, he was someone who had countless experience working with communities globally on issues of environmental change, but in particular, really pioneering the approach where rather than looking at it as a top-down approach or only from the biophysical, he started to understand that in order to get a grasp of how these changes in the environment were affecting people, you had to go and spend time with people in particular places, in very local contexts. And in doing so, it has to be a research with people and not on people. And he brought this experience and this vision to Arctic and to ArcticNet in its first year. What I mean that he took a chance on me is that as a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair, he could have chosen a lot of grad students who had far better credentials than I did. And it wasn't until the year after my master's that I was in the office with Barry, and he handed me an unsealed envelope with a letter in it. And it was a letter of reference that I had submitted as part of my grad school application that was unopened because they already had sufficient letters. And he said, look, it's yours. You can open it if you want. You don't have to open it. I did open it, and I took a read of it. And to my shock, that letter, who I thought some former prof would champion me, actually, in my eyes, was not championing me. They said that I was overly passionate, that I was hard to keep on task, that I was, in this case, somebody who would go off on tangents and pursue his own interests rather than addressing the topic at hand. They said that this was someone who was a little bit, more difficult to get to sit down and finish a task that they didn't want to do, but rather would be pursuing ideas that they wanted to. They said I was argumentative. They said that I liked to debate. All these characteristics that I thought, oh no, thank goodness they didn't read it because I'd be doomed. But in fact, these are the characteristics that I remember Barry saying, this is why he selected me as a grad student. He wanted someone who would challenge ideas, who wasn't set in their ways. He wanted someone who had passion. And when I came, he found this fit in the Arctic. So that was the first exposure I had. And it's really credit to people like Dr. Louis Fortier, who created this network, and Barry Smith, who became part of this network, and Dr. James Ford, who was the PhD student at the time, in that first year of the network, that allowed me that space to become part of it. And that was really my entry point. So before I go way too far into this journey, I really want to make sure that if you have a question, to ask it. I know Inu is online. I don't want to rush through, but I also want to see if I can hit some important moments in this journey that are of interest to you. And I'll try to share some of those anecdotes and stories that are personal, so it makes it, I guess it'll be interesting, a little bit exposing, but also interesting and different than maybe what I've written about. So at Guelph, back in 2004, when I started my graduate studies, it was, again, a daunting task, but I learned some important things. And the first thing I learned was that when we're going to go about addressing issues, and in my case, understanding how the impacts of climate change are affecting people and how people are coping and adapting to those changes, requires working with people. And again, the value of a mentor, the value of a network that nurtured mentorship was imperative for me able to do this work. And what I mean by that is, you come into graduate school, and to work in the Arctic, it's expensive. And to be able to do it, what I would consider properly, is really expensive. And in my case, I had someone who was willing to enable that. The first time I visited the Arctic was to do a pre-research consultation dialogue with the Nunavut Game Council, just to sit down and discuss the ideas that I have and see if they match the ideas that they had and see if there was a good fit. My initial project had nothing to do with what I ended up doing in my master's. My initial project was going to be focusing on the impacts of permafrost thaw on infrastructure in some of the coastal communities in the Nunavut region, because there was an expression of interest to do that from those communities. When I went to the Game Council, I met two representatives from the community of Uluhukta, which was Holman at the time, and they said, look, we would love to have somebody come to our community, work with us, really hear our story, document our story of our experiences with change. I had never been to Uluhukta. I really was uninformed. You have to remember, this was a time before internet was in the Arctic, so there was no communication on Facebook with people in the community and whatnot. It was very much a thing that I had to go and visit, which I did. And the only reason I could is because I was with who's now a very good colleague and a former master's committee member, Professor Frank Jordan, who's a professor at University of Victoria. And Frank and I had this opportunity, and financed by ArcticNet, they said, you should go and visit the community and talk with the community, which I did. And that initial visit for 1 week changed everything. You know, I think back to that, where 1 week in, I believe it was February or March, maybe it was March of 2004. And I now go forward to 2020, and I'm still working together with the community of Uluhukta. I did my master's with that community. I did my PhD with that community. Numerous grad students that I've supervised have worked together with people in that community, in that region. And it all comes right back down to that one visit. that one visit that enabled me to go talk to people, hear what they had to say, feel welcomed, feel like I had a role to play, feel that through my passion and interest, I could channel it in a way that didn't just necessarily work on behalf of my degree, but worked on behalf of the interests of the people. And, you know, from that, it's just been an absolutely incredible journey. So from that moment, I wanted to see if anyone has any question about that initial stage of my career back in 2004 when I just started my master's. So as I keep going, feel free to reach out if you have a question. From that time, I guess what I would like to also mention is that ArcticNet as a network has played a role because it brought everyone together once a year at the ArcticNet scientific meeting. And what that made it feel for me was that I was part of something bigger than just what I was doing. It got me excited. I saw these other great researchers doing things that I really admired and wanted to be part of. I'm thinking about Dr. Jill Oakes from the University of Manitoba, who brought this energy to ArcticNet with her students and doing it her way. And if you know her way means that it's with people. It's really engaging the people that she works with as part of the process. She's working across disciplines with different knowledge systems, and it's inspiring. So it was ArcticNet that really kept me motivated through this graduate period. In my research in the Arctic, I spent in my graduate studies, I think it was 2 or 3 months in Ilahukto, interviewing, observing, participating, and really being part of that first wave of documenting some of the first experiences dealing with the changing climate. And that kind of fits in the same era of Dr. James Ford, who was working in Arctic Bay with Arctic Bay and Inuit at the time, and Dr. Sherry Fox, who was also working in Inuit, and Dr. Gita Laidler, and so many others that were working on similar issues, but with different communities. And now I look back and what an exciting time to be part of that. I remember during my master's, I said on many times, oh, I wish I could have visited the Arctic 30 years ago or 50 years ago, because I was so interested in the amazing people and knowledge and way of life that exists there. And when I was there in 2004, there were still several, what I would say is first generation settlement community members. So meaning Inuit who had been born and grew up on the land and had moved into the community in their adult life. And they were, you know, in Ilahukto and very strong language and culture and way of life present, but recognizing that so many had already passed and that there was this other history that came before me. And I remember speaking to a good colleague and also a wonderful mentor and colleague of mine, Dr. Peter Collins at the University of Florida, who selflessly welcomed me into a community that he's had a long-term relationship with. And I remember mentioning this to him because he has 20 more years of experience and stories and relationships that I admired. And now going forward to 2020, I am extraordinarily thankful that I was there when I did, because so many of those great people have now passed. And at the time where people were talking about language retention and the generation and transmission of knowledge, I realized that it's really a continuum. And whatever stage you get to be part of is so special because it'll never be the same. And I feel for me, that graduate experience, that master's experience, was such a privilege because I got to be part of people's lives. I got to be part of their lives at a particular time where we shared that, we were able to document that, we achieved some successes. And when I realized it'll never be like that again, it's different. It's not better or worse, it's just completely different. So from graduate school, I was exhausted. I love working in the Arctic, but I was exhausted with academia, and I thought, I need to get out into the real world and get a job. So I'm not going to go detail into every stage of my career, but I want to say that after working in the Arctic, it grips you, and especially working with communities, and it did grip me. And I took the opportunity to continue after my master's degree to work for years as a research associate And that allowed me to travel to other places in the Arctic. So I was able to travel and spend some time in Nunavut and Nunatsiavut and learn a little bit more about the diversity that exists. And what that impressed upon me is that there's extreme diversity in the Arctic, cultural diversity, geographic diversity, biodiversity, and that collectively it's just this incredibly diverse place, which then impressed upon me that in order to understand these issues, you really have to do it across the Arctic. One place can't necessarily speak on behalf of another. So from there, I realized I really was passionate about the relationships I developed in Lehukto, and that I didn't want to say goodbye to those. And I took the opportunity from there to pursue a PhD. And I always said I would never do a PhD. I didn't want to do it, didn't need it, because my friends were getting married and buying houses and settling down into their lives. And I felt, I wanted to be part of that productive society. I wanted to be part of the current narrative when it came to environmental change. I didn't want to be stuck in a classroom. I wanted to be doing it. And right before actually the PhD, I did multiple job interviews. And this might be relevant to some of you who are finishing and thinking, wow, what am I going to do afterwards? And I can tell you what, I remember locking myself away at the University of Guelph thinking, oh, I don't want to violate or threaten any potential PhD opportunities by applying to jobs. So I'm going to do this quietly and confidentially. And I remember applying to a government job. I remember applying to a non-governmental sector. I remember applying to a private sector job, and I would do these phone interviews quietly. And I actually went to 2 in-person interviews. And after the first one, I walked down and went, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can sit in an office in Ottawa. It's not me. It goes completely against the grain of my passion. And the next one that I went to was a non-governmental organization, and it felt a little bit better. It was in the north, and I thought I could maybe do this. What I realized is I don't know enough. I need to know more. I want more experience. I want to be able to bring the most I can forward before I get into a position of decision making. And that's really what solidified my decision to pursue a PhD. And I was extraordinarily fortunate that I had a mentor, Dr. Barry Smith, who stuck by me during that journey. And through the International Polar Year of 2007, I had the opportunity through the International Polar Year and ArcticNet and the strong collaboration that the Polar Year and ArcticNet built to pursue a PhD within that forum. And I did so in collaboration again with the community of Lehukto. And it built upon my previous work and the previous work of others to really dig into this question of how knowledge is generated and transmitted in the context of helping people facilitate dealing with change. In this case, in the subsistence sector, how do people deal with changing ice conditions, wildlife conditions, permafrost, climate, weather? How do they deal with that? And drawing on the knowledge of the past, but in the current context. And I did, over the course of 4 years, spend considerable time working in Lehukto, working with a cohort of Inuit men to understand how knowledge is generated and transmitted amongst them, and what role that plays in facilitating their ability to continue to participate in subsistence under changing conditions. So that was, again, another seminal time. I was part of ArcticNet the whole time. I went to ArcticNet ASMs every year. I continued to build relationships during those times. Those relationships were with my colleagues. Those relationships were with professors and others as part of the network, and the relationships in the community. So if we were to really take away something from today, I would say one of the most important part of my career so far has been relationships. I've always been Tristan. That never changed as I went through grad studies. And it's that personality. I like to meet people. I like building relationships that has really been some of the most rewarding parts of my career today. So when I say relationships, they all take time, but most of the relationships that started early on in my master's, the ones that were really strong have continued to today. I think of my colleagues that I work with, people like Dr. James Ford or Dr. Robert McClellan or Dr. Chris Fergal or Dr. Gita Layler, Dr. Lisa Lassetto, all these amazing people, Dr. Jackie Dawson, who I've met early on in my career. You spend time together, and it's that shared passion that allows you to continue to support each other and run not necessarily parallel, but parallel and interconnecting throughout the career. So for those of you that are in graduate studies right now, or grad school at master's or PhD, or even working, I think nurture the relationships, build relationships with the people that you enjoy working with, because it's really neat to share that journey. Again, I could go on, the list is so long. I apologize for those that I might miss, but I'm just reflecting right now at so many great people that I have the opportunity to work with. So I see that you have no questions, so that gives me a green light to talk. And so I'm going to keep doing that until somebody jumps in. So with this idea of relationships, another aspect of relationship that I would want to share is the relationships with communities. I can't overstate the power of relationship building with the people you work with. That's what draws me back to working with Lhakto. I was speaking with people there today about helping apply to new funding to support some of their initiatives. And it's just such a pleasure to have that history with people. And it's not just about doing the work, it's about life. And in life, I would still nurture these relationships with the work being a benefit or complementary to them. And I'll give you an example. I remember my PhD walking down the ring road down on the shore of Queens Bay in Lhakto back in, I think it was 2008, second year of my PhD. And an elder who lives on the shore was sitting on just in his porch, and he was just leaning outside. I think it was fall time. And he goes, "Hey, you must really like it here." And I said, "Yeah, well, you keep coming back." And I thought, well, this is the first time he's ever spoken to me or even acknowledged me. But his point was, he goes, "Hey, you keep showing up. You're not somebody who's just, a one-time visitor. Maybe it's worth saying hi. Maybe it is worth getting to know you." And what I realized is that I'm not the only one in the coming and going from the Arctic, and that communities have so many different people visiting that, it becomes one of these things that until you can become familiar with someone, it's sometimes difficult to reach out. It's difficult to extend a welcoming arm beyond a hello, because you don't know if you ever see him again. And for me, that felt really good. I felt like I had made a step forward, building relationships. And I'm still, working on relationships. And I find that extraordinarily rewarding, because when they're reciprocal, it just feels good in life to have close friends. With those relationships, I want to pick up on something. Is when I finished my PhD, actually before I go there too far, I'm going to pick up on two things. One is I want to share a little bit about this PhD, and it sounds so easy. You just apply to a PhD and you go through it. But I want to just touch upon some of the struggles, or shall I say challenges, that I faced. And then I want to talk a little bit about how doing that PhD allowed me to further support those relationships by what I would describe as working the academy, working the university system to give back to the community that's given me so much. So the first is I want to talk a little bit about that PhD, and I want to mention one thing, funding. I had funding through ArcticNet, but as everyone can appreciate, to live and do a PhD is expensive. To work in the Arctic is expensive, and you might have your field costs, but your living costs are sometimes a real challenge to be able to maintain. Throughout my entire master's, I held a second job because I didn't get the big Tri-Council funding. I had good funding through teaching assistantships and through ArcticNet, but in order to sustain life, I had to work other jobs, and that was great. In the PhD, I continued doing that, and it got to a point where I thought, I'm doomed. I am not successful with the Tri-Council. I had applied 3 times, the Tri-Council being Social Science and Humanities Research Council in this case. And again, I just wasn't competitive enough next to the people in my program who had exceptionally high grades. And I think I came in the last time with an 89%, and I thought that was going to do it, but it didn't do it. And what I learned was relationships outside of your academic life can also be extraordinarily important. And at the University of Guelph, when I was there, I did a lot of things like play tennis and soccer and participate in extracurricular activities. And I never really knew what the people who I played with and interacted with did, beyond that they probably had an affiliation with the university. Well, in the second year of my PhD, I had applied to the Tri-Council, and I thought, this is it. This is it. I'm going to get the PhD scholarship, and it's going to mean that I can conduct this research. I'm going to be able to do it in a calmer way. I don't have to have 2 or 3 jobs. And I got the letter saying, sorry, or apologies, or congratulations for applying, but you have not been selected. And I felt pretty deflated. And I don't know if anyone else has experienced that. If you have, you know the feeling. You feel a little bit deflated because you put so much in and you had so much hope. But a few weeks later, it was about a month later, I received an email and it said, congratulations, you've been selected for the Vanier. And I thought, I didn't even apply. It was the new program, so the Vanier Doctoral Scholarship. What they had done is they had created a new program, which automatically, as being an applicant to the Tri-Council, you were eligible for. And the Vanier could be still considered really the gold standard for funding at the tune of $150,000 tax-free, which I look back at now and I think, what an amazing funding opportunity. Now, how does that connect with relationships through soccer and tennis and all this? Well, what I learned was when I went to the Vanier competition, when the committee sat there, so maybe there's 10 people and they have to rank their applicants, I didn't come up number 1 for too many people. I didn't come up number 2 for too many people, but I came up number 3 and 4 for a lot of people. And it was because I was, I guess, acceptable to a lot of people, including several people who I didn't even know sat on the committee, but I knew socially through my social or university soccer and university activities. They knew me, they knew what I did, they had a basic relationship. For some reason, I guess some of them championed me, and I was awarded it. And that changed everything, because all of a sudden now I was able to give a full-time, dedicated attention to my work. And that was huge. So the lesson learned, when you apply to a major award and get shot down, make sure to do it 3 or 4 times, because you never know. By the 4th, or in my case, I guess this is the 4th time, you could be pleasantly surprised and awarded with something that you didn't even expect. And that changed the course of everything for me. So there's one thing when it comes to awards. As far as how that led me to complete the PhD at a high level, it allowed me to spend a lot of time in the Arctic. I was able to spend 3, 4, 5 months at a time because I had the financial support to be able to maintain my fees at the university, my life, and as well as conduct the work. So huge. Still no questions. You're a very quiet audience. I see that I know some of you, so I'm hoping one of you is going to pop in and ask me a question. Otherwise, I feel like I'm alone here.
Tristan, there's one question there. It says what captivated. It says, what made you stay in academia?
Hey, fantastic question. What made me stay in academia? Well, maybe I can start by what made me want to go to academia. I always called myself, I shouldn't say this too loud, but I always called myself a fake academic because I didn't really fit within that system. What made me go to academia was I saw an opportunity to explore ideas. I continually am intrigued by the world and frustrated by it. So I went to academia because I felt like it was a safe space to be able to explore ideas with people who were also passionate about exploring ideas. I wanted to be in a space that was less political, less about who I was, but what I want to be. And that's why I got into it, and that's why I stayed. I found that academia can be a forum, should be a forum for ideas, and I think that's what the world needs. I'm inspired by people like David Attenborough and these other great people who have ideas, and it doesn't matter who you are, where you're from, what gender, what age, it doesn't matter. It's the idea. That's why I've stayed in academia, and that's why I really feel lucky to be part of it. And I feel even luckier to be part of it at UNBC, because I think UNBC at its heart really captures what academia is for me. When I walk out on campus at UNBC, there's a wall with thousands of names, and it's the names of people who back in the 90s, early 90s, paid a small donation in order to get a petition going to create a university, in this case, for Northern British Columbia. It's supposed to be a university in the North for the North. And when I look out there, I see my mom and dad's names, and I think, yes, this is what it's all about. This is about saying that, we can stay home, we can work on issues in a space that is local but global in perspective. And I think it's so cool that I get to be here today. I'm sitting in the office today thinking how lucky I am. I feel really lucky, because this place just feels like it's infinite what you can do with it. It's young, but it's established, and you can push the limits. And maybe I'll share with you how you can push the limits. So talk about using the academy or working in the academy. And when I say academy, I mean the university system, the funding structures that are available to it as a way of giving back. And I strategically put on my shelf 2 books. They're right there, the Nunamili Hakvia. And I have slides, but you can look it up, Nunamili Hakvia. What I found was there's all of a sudden this motion going, this I guess you could call it like a wave of momentum happening in that academy towards doing what Dr. Barry Smith had been saying from the day I got to university. We need to be working more with people, engaging people as equal partners in research, wherever you work. Doesn't have to be the Arctic, wherever you work. And in doing so, do research differently. And what I mean by differently, what he's saying is doing it differently than, say, we have been to address the same issues. So rather than addressing climate change in the Arctic from only a biophysical perspective, where we're measuring change, and we're doing so with only one approach and methods and the tools available to us, we're opening that up and saying there's other tools available to us. And it was actually in ArcticNet that wave started to happen. I remember back in 2005 in Banff, Alberta, when Barry Smith said, look, you should bring a community research partner. Who are you working with in Alaptoon? They should also be coming and presenting. It just makes sense. They did all the research with you. If they want to come and join and share it, bring them with you. Costs money. And I look back to people like Louis Fortier, and that's why I want to really make him or reference him today, as it was people like Dr. Louis Fortier and Martin Fortier who heard Barry and said, you know what, ArcticNet will support that. And they did. They paid, facilitated. In that case, I remember it was Fred Katayak from Ilahukta, and he proudly came to Banff and not only shared what we did in his research, but was an Inuit representative, shared culture. He shared Inuit language and spirit. It was just, at that time in ArcticNet, it was really a big moment because it paved the way for today, where it's now the norm. And it wasn't the norm. We had to break down some of these barriers. So it was, it was those moments that really paved the way to what I was able to do after the PhD. And when I say working in the academy, I want to get to that, is Health Canada, through the Climate Change Health and Adaptation Program, which is still ongoing, they were the first that I know of that said, look, why don't we do this a little different? Rather than funding go to the university, let's make it so that you partner with the community. The funding will go to the community organization, which they will govern and administer. It was unheard of at the time. And what's really cool about it is you build capacity in the community to be able to administer the funding. Maybe it wasn't there at the time, but you can use it as an opportunity to find those training opportunities, to allow people in those communities to learn how to do this, to engage in it in a way that they want to, and partner with somebody else, like an academic, to do the parts of the project that they are best equipped to do. And it was at that moment that I really started to see the value of staying in academia. Because one of the first chat programs I applied to was with the community of Lahakto for a project called Nunamililihakvia, Learning from the Land, built on the work I did in my PhD, and was all focused about the generation and transmission of knowledge related to subsistence harvesting, sowing, and language. It's Inuit driven, it's Inuit governed, all the money goes to the community. They get to facilitate the project in ways that work best for them. And my role in it is to still be able to help do some of that documentation, to ask some of the questions in ways where we can come out with a nice output, be it a report or a paper or a book or other dissemination materials. And to be part of that has been one of the highlights of my academic career so far, because it turned things on its head. For those of you working at universities, you have to remember, big grants that come to university, there's like 30–40% overhead. So if you get a grant for $100,000, you might have 60,000 of it to use. Whereas when you go through something like the chat program to the community, you get 100% of it to use. So 100% of it sees value within the community. And that to me was just really exciting. And I've continued to be part of that because I get such excitement out of it. Until I learned that in the university system, when you're applying for things like tenure and promotion, it doesn't count, because really some universities, not all, but the university that I was previously at, which is the University of Sunshine Coast, Australia, it was about the money that would come to the university, and that was what was counted. Money that didn't come to the university, even though you're affiliated, didn't count. So I went to several of my progress reporting meetings where I thought I had done so much, but they were programs that were working in the academy in some ways to give back, that didn't show up on the community's reporting system. So in fact, it looked like I had done very little, I'd been very unsuccessful. And that was, that's something that was a little bit of a struggle. And I've written about that. I wrote that in a few articles, and you can see it there's a few book chapters and papers about that experience. But coming back to UNBC has shown me that even institutions like UNBC, they've evolved as well, just as Health Canada evolved. And they recognize the importance of doing this, and they put value on projects and programs that are community driven, where funding doesn't necessarily come directly to the universities. So I find it exciting to be in the academy when the academy allows me to do things that I enjoy doing, like some of these projects. And I encourage you to look up Nunamililihakvia. There's some YouTube videos. It's just a neat initiative because it's so grassroots, bottom up. I know there's other initiatives similar to it, but in the case of Lahakto, there's something special about it. It's got this energy, this kind of just this life unto itself, where people are passionate about continuing what they do, and they're proud of it, but they're proud of it in a way where they want to share. It's such a wonderful place because it's a place that doesn't, in my eyes, Lahakto is a place that doesn't see differences. They welcome everybody to come be part of their culture. And I think that's something that the rest of the world can learn from, where we don't have to be defensive of our culture. We should rather be proud and sharing of it. And it's neat to be part of that. So that's something about working in the academy as a way of giving back. Oh, I see a question here about other universities. You know, I think it's a fantastic question whether other universities value research that perhaps does not directly come into the university. Geez, I would love to know. I wish they would. I think it just makes sense. I suspect that some probably haven't, but I think it's so important because at the end of the day, the value of the research, yes, I know you have to get research income in order to support the research staff and what other programs, and that's fine. But when it comes to some of these projects, I think the value of them is even greater when you can have the research, the funds and whatnot governed all in the place. And what I mean by that is you build partnerships that are, you build relationships that are real. It makes doing research easy. It allows others to be able to ask questions of interest to them that they otherwise wouldn't be able to do. What I mean by that is you do one of these projects, say in the case of myself working in the community of Lahakto, you do one of these projects and now you've you built capacities in the project so a future researcher can go and say, hey, I'm interested in doing this, and the capacities there exist to be able to have that dialogue. I think of all the graduate students, including myself, who have been working with the community of Lhakto to answer questions of mutual interest. And some of you might be online, and some of you might hear this after, but I think we can all agree that we've benefited hugely. Whoever we are, we benefited hugely. We benefited career-wise, and that's translated into salaries and in careers. We've benefited hugely personally through the relationships, the knowledge. We benefited hugely from just the sheer ability and access to different forums like ArcticNet that we wouldn't otherwise would have had we not had the support of the community through our journey. So to me, it just makes sense that I could do everything I can to support what the community would also want. And in some cases, that means people like to come and co-share research. In other cases, I've been told flat out, they don't want to. Some people, that's not their thing. They're living their life there. They're happy to participate in the work. They want to share in doing those projects, but they look to me and say, sharing and doing PowerPoints, going to conferences, that's your thing. And we thank you for doing that. And that's what a relationship's about. But I like being able to at least be on that equal footing where you can say, where do we go from here? And having funding go to the community creates a much more equal footing. It makes it so that there's a greater say in how things are done. I talked a lot. I'm sorry.
There's another question here, and I'm wondering if I can actually just invite Natalie on screen. Now, Natalie, you can decline on your screen. The only way you're going to get on screen is to accept it. So I'm going to invite you on screen to ask your question, but feel free to decline. So I just invited.
Here, right? Yes.
Okay, I'll just ask the question. It can take longer to engage communities as equal partners and ultimately can mean fewer publications. It takes longer to publish, but publications seem to be the currency of academia. What tips do you have for early career researchers to find balance with regard to community work and writing/publishing?
Yeah, it's a great question. Geez. I can say from my perspective, well, one, I just think it's a good question. It's one that I think is ever present in a lot of academics and minds. So when it comes to publishing, I agree with you. It's the currency of careers. Does it take more time? Absolutely. I can say a couple things, actually. Not all research necessarily has to be, I don't believe all research needs to be co-authored or co-produced. Research that's community-based and working with communities may lend itself to that. And in that case, so in my field and perhaps in some of yours, it means producing work together and publishing, and it's going to be slower. And what I mean by slower is if you're truly having co-authorship and you're reviewing that work with co-authors and research partners, it takes time. And it's a lot more time than if you just did it in a isolation yourself and submitted it. What I learned early on was the value of that is when it came to co-authorship, it was Dr. Barry Smith who told me, he said, if somebody has made a meaningful contribution to that work, regardless if they wrote it, but a meaningful contribution, it merits an invitation for co-authorship. And that means if you can, to be able to go and discuss that paper in whatever medium is appropriate to do that. And in my early work, I really committed to that and it did take more time. What I'm learning now is that there is ways of asking research questions as part of these community-based projects, which are then able to be published. And I think publishing is really important. I do, because it gets the information out. When it comes to the question of, does it take longer? It does. Tips. The tips that I would give, the tips that I'm kind of learning from, one of them would be, when you're doing these community-based projects, or if you're working in a community-based project, make sure to have a compelling question asked and collect data to support it. A lot of these projects become so big and ongoing that they're unruly. They're so wonderful when you're there, but nobody knows about them because we don't have time to write it up. I really think, for me, what I've learned is if I ask a specific question within that project, I'm able to generate new knowledge and information from it, which I can publish, which I can then use as leverage to keep that project going. So I'll give you a couple examples. One of them is with Nunamili Hakvia. Just recently, a huge focus in Nunamili Hakvia was sewing. And we realized in the community of Lahakto, sewing is incredibly important. But if you talk to someone who doesn't necessarily know about sewing or appreciate the role that it plays in Inuit culture, they might not see the same value. So what we did was a project that documented the role and importance of sewing to Inuit women. And in doing so, we were able to generate data on that question, which we've then been able to submit for publication. Previously, we've done similar efforts when it came to food security, other issues of health. So that's one tip, is ask those questions. The other one is, I think there is huge value in collaboration. There's nothing wrong with co-authorship. And I think if you go back to what I was saying about relationships, build those relationships so, well, if you're the one championing the project on the ground, somebody else can be starting up a paper. Maybe it's a master's student, maybe it's a colleague, whatever it may be. But if you build that, I guess it's a community or a network of relationships, you can contribute different things at different times. So at this stage, you might be the one on the ground collecting the data, nurturing the relationship, making sure that the project is going well. And at another time, you might be the person who can take the data, analyze it, start writing it up, circulating a draft. And the next time you can be a second author, a third author, and the next time you can be a first author, so on and so forth. And I think that really contributes to a bigger publication record, which is kind of the value, the currency in academics. Something I want to touch on before we run out of time is that next journey from say the PhD and onwards. And one of the things that I learned was coming out of the PhD, it gets to a point where you have to finish the PhD, yet you have all this amazing information. And I still feel like I have so much I want to share from the PhD that I owe to the people I worked with to get out. But because you get pushed into something else, you don't get to it. And that's where a postdoc, I think, can be wonderful. And I didn't really know that I was going to do a postdoc. But my postdoc, which I'll share with you, was really, I guess, different than some of the others. I had spent the majority of my master's, in between my master's, and all of my PhD in the Arctic. I spent almost 4, 5, 6 months a year in the Arctic working on the research. When it came to finishing my PhD, again, this speaks to having good mentorship. And I have a wonderful mentor in Dr. Barry Smith, who said, if you want to continue to pursue a career in academics, you have to make sure to get experience in the different aspects of academics. And one of those is going to be teaching and supervising students. And he said, while you have a lot of experience now applying for funding, conducting research, publishing, you don't have as much experience in teaching and graduate supervision. So actually my postdoc was the year after my PhD, and it kind of piggybacked on the end of an International Polar Year project where I was able to do a teaching postdoc. I didn't even know what a teaching postdoc was. And when I learned what a teaching postdoc is an opportunity to develop and teach university level courses. And I did so over 2 courses at the University of Guelph. And the first course I taught was a course that Dr. Barry Smith had taught for 20 years. And I still remember me trying to teach this course, and Barry sat in the auditorium in the back row. Notoriously, every day, I would be struggling, trying so hard to do a great lecture, and up his hand went, and I thought, oh no. But it was great. He was really challenging me and pushing me to do great. But that journey was wonderful because it gave me the first experience how to develop courses. And the next semester I developed one from very preliminary stages. I executed it. I had a mentor, Dr. Alice Havorka, who's I believe now at York University, really mentoring and giving me guidance in teaching and graduate supervision. in which Dr. Barry Smith, engaged me and allowed me to be part of some of the students that he was currently supervising. And I look to that and I go, it's been invaluable. I think of the steps and the next steps, and that's the only reason I felt confident taking grad students on really early, is because I felt like I had some experience from it. So, I guess my message is for people doing their PhDs and you want to stay in academia, a postdoc doesn't mean you have to go and do another PhD. It can mean something else that's of value to you. Hi, Amy.
It's just about a couple minutes to 7. But I was wondering if it's okay to maybe share your email in case people have more questions.
Of course.
It's also on your website, which is very nice, by the way. But I wanted to thank you again, everybody, for coming to today's webinar. And I'm sorry we couldn't figure out the screen share, Tristan.
Not a problem. For those that, I saved you from a PowerPoint. So in some senses, it worked out well.
Yep, and there's lots of questions, which is great. And I guess we'll keep an eye on our socials to find out what our next webinar is. And I guess we'll see you at the next webinar. Getting some claps.
And thank you to those. I see some comments, and absolutely, I know these webinars are the new way of doing it for now, and I appreciate Inuit for the leadership in putting this on. And for all of you that tuned in, it's really a pleasure. I feel humbled to be able to speak on this, and if you ever want to have a conversation, I'd be most pleased to do so.
Awesome. All right. Once I press end, it's going to kick everybody out. So, yeah. Okay. Thanks again, Tristan.
You're most welcome.
And I hope everyone has a good night. And if you have any questions, you can send an email to the ASA email if you want access to Tristan's email or any questions at all.
Absolutely.
All
Again,
right.
thank you, Inu. Thank you to the ASA. Thanks to all that participated. Wonderful to be able to be here. Humbling to be here. My email, as Inu said, is available. You're welcome to reach out to me. And I encourage everybody to, take a note and learn a little bit more about Dr. Louis Fortier's career. Very inspiring. It's just a nice reflection and nice way to feel inspired and privileged to be part of ArcticNet and Arctic research.
Yeah. All right. Should we stay a couple minutes in case people have questions, or are we okay? No. Okay. Okay. I think we're okay. People are logging off now. Okay. I'm gonna press this, and then it's gonna save the recording. Okay. Bye.
Bye for now.